Imagine this. You've spent 16 years building a company from the ground up, turning million-dollar deals into lasting partnerships, only to hear your new boss say these exact words. You're too expensive. Two college kids can replace you. What happened next wasn't just revenge. It was a complete market takeover that left an entire industry speechless. Trust me, by the end of this story, you'll understand why firing the wrong person can literally destroy your business overnight. My name is Elio Dicent, and at 52 years old, I thought I'd heard every possible insult in the corporate world. But sitting across from Verania Campoli in her sterile corner office at Hartwell Industries, I realized I was wrong. This Harvard MBA, barely 34 years old, had just delivered the most devastating blow of my career with the cold efficiency of someone reading quarterly reports. "The numbers don't lie, Elio," she continued, her manicured fingers tapping against a manila folder that contained my professional death sentence. "Kyle Stevens and Anaria Clark combined cost half your salary and bring fresh perspectives to our client relationships." Fresh perspectives. I almost laughed. Kyle had been out of business school for exactly 8 months, and Anaria still kept her textbooks on her desk like trophies. But here's what Verona didn't understand, and what would ultimately cost her everything. Those fresh perspectives had never closed a deal when the client was bleeding money and needed a supplier they could trust with their company's survival. Let me paint you the full picture of what Verona was about to throw away. 16 years ago, Hartwell Industries was a nobody, a regional supplier fighting for scraps, while companies like Sterling Enterprises dominated the Southwest industrial market. When I walked through those doors for the first time, our biggest client was worth maybe $50,000 annually. By the time Verona arrived with her cost-cutting mission, I was personally managing relationships worth over $12 million in recurring revenue. But here's where it gets interesting. Those relationships weren't built in boardrooms or through PowerPoint presentations. Jim Thompson at Apex Manufacturing? I earned his loyalty the night I personally drove emergency parts to his plant at 2 a.m. when a shutdown would have cost him $300,000. Frank Aberry at Southwest Drilling? I restructured our entire pricing model to help him survive a board review that nearly ended his career. Ella Black at Gulf Coast Refineries? I spent 6 months learning the technical specifications of her operation just so I could speak her language during negotiations. These weren't just business transactions. They were partnerships forged through reliability, personal attention, and the kind of deep industry knowledge that you can't learn from a textbook or acquire in a corporate training program. But Verania Campoli saw none of this. She looked at my salary, the highest in the sales department, and saw only an expense line that needed optimizing. What she failed to recognize was that she wasn't just firing her most experienced sales director. She was about to hand Sterling Enterprises, our biggest competitor, a detailed roadmap to destroy everything she was trying to protect. The meeting ended with Verona giving me 3 days to document everything for Kyle and Anaria. Everything. 16 years of relationship building, competitor intelligence, client psychology, and market insights that had given Hartwell Industries its competitive edge. She wanted me to gift wrap my entire career for 2 kids who probably thought customer relationship management was just a software program.
"I'll have it ready," I said, standing up from her conference table. But as I walked back to my office, something was already forming in my mind. If Verena wanted everything documented, she would get everything. Every client preference, every competitor weakness, every piece of market intelligence I'd gathered. The only question was whether that information would stay within Hartwell's walls or find its way to someone who would actually appreciate its value. That afternoon, my phone rang. Remy Adam, CEO of Sterling Enterprises, our biggest competitor and the one person who understood exactly what Verena had just done. "Elio, I heard some interesting news about Hartwell Industries." His voice carried the tone of someone who'd been waiting for this opportunity for years. "Word travels fast in our industry, Remy." "Indeed it does. Would you be interested in discussing opportunities?" "I have some ideas about expanding our market share in territories where we've struggled to compete." "Your territory." Even Remy understood something that Verena had completely missed. Geographic markets aren't just lines on a map. They're networks of relationships, trust, and institutional knowledge. When you fire the person who built those networks, you don't just lose an employee. You potentially arm your competition with everything they need to destroy you. I might be available for the right opportunity, I said, looking at the stack of files on my desk. Client preference, competitive vulnerabilities, market timing insights. 16 years of competitive advantage that Verena had just made available to the highest bidder. Excellent. How about breakfast tomorrow? I think you'll find our conversation very productive. After hanging up, I opened my laptop and started working on 2 separate documents. The first was exactly what Verena had requested, a comprehensive transition guide for Kyle and Aniria. But the second document was something entirely different, a detailed analysis of Hartwell Industries' operational weaknesses, pricing vulnerabilities, and strategic blind spots. Information that would be extremely valuable to a competitor looking to gain market share. Some business lessons are expensive. Others are catastrophic. Verena Campoli was about to learn the difference between firing an employee and creating a competitive nightmare that would haunt her for the rest of her career. The next morning, I met Remy Adam at Riverside Diner on Commerce Street. He was already waiting, a seasoned executive who understood that competitive advantages come from strategic thinking, not cost-cutting spreadsheets. Elio, I've been watching Hartwell's growth over the past decade. Your market penetration in Texas and Louisiana has been impressive. We've struggled to compete in territories where you have established relationships. Relationships take time to build, but they can shift quickly when circumstances change.
Over the next hour, I explained Verena's strategic vision, her belief that relationship-based selling was outdated, her confidence that systematic processes could replace institutional knowledge, her assumption that clients would remain loyal to Hartwell regardless of who managed their accounts. So she's essentially betting that your clients will continue doing business with Hartwell even without the relationships that originally attracted them? Remy asked. That's her assumption. I pulled out a folder containing market analysis I'd compiled over the years. 40% of our major clients have expressed frustration with Hartwell's recent service changes. Another 30% have mentioned receiving competitive bids from other suppliers. The relationships I built were often the only thing keeping them from switching. Remy studied the documents with the intensity of someone who recognized their strategic value. Elio, I'm going to make you an offer. Senior Vice President of Strategic Development at Sterling Enterprises. 20% salary increase, full benefits, and a mandate to expand our market share using your industry expertise. The offer was generous, but more importantly, it was an opportunity to prove that Verena had made the biggest strategic error of her career. What exactly would strategic development involve? I asked. Leading our competitive response to Hartwell Industries, using your knowledge of their operational weaknesses and client relationships to position Sterling as the preferred alternative when those relationships inevitably deteriorate. This was exactly what Verena should have anticipated. When you fire someone with deep competitive intelligence, you don't just lose their knowledge. You risk that knowledge being used against you. Remy, I need to be clear about something. I won't violate any confidentiality agreements or use proprietary information. Everything I know came from legitimate industry experience and client relationships that I built personally.
I understand completely. We're not asking you to steal trade secrets. We're asking you to compete using the market knowledge and professional relationships you've developed over your career. The distinction was important. I wasn't going to Sterling Enterprises as a corporate spy. I was going as an experienced sales professional who understood market dynamics that Verena had chosen to ignore. Monday morning, I called Remy and accepted his offer. By noon, press releases announced my hiring as Senior Vice President of Strategic Development. By 2 p.m., industry publications were running stories about Hartwell's veteran sales director joining their biggest competitor. By 4 p.m., my phone started ringing. Elio, this is Jim Thompson at Apex Manufacturing. I just heard you left Hartwell. What happened? Corporate restructuring, Jim. New management wanted to go in a different direction. Who's handling our account now? Kyle Stevens. Good kid, fresh out of business school. Long pause. Elio, if you don't mind me asking, where did you land? Sterling Enterprises, Senior Vice President of Strategic Development. Sterling's your biggest competitor. They were. Now they're my employer. Similar conversations happened throughout the week. Francabelli at Southwest Drilling, Ella Black at Gulf Coast Refineries, all expressing surprise at my departure, all questioning whether their relationships with Hartwell would continue under new management. I didn't encourage them to switch suppliers. I didn't need to. When you remove the person who built client relationships, those relationships become vulnerable to competitive pressure. Meanwhile, Kyle and Anaria were discovering that client management involved more than systematic processes. Jim Thompson called them 3 times about delivery schedules before getting frustrated. Francabelli canceled a quarterly business review when Anaria couldn't answer questions about his company's expansion plans. 6 months later, the market shift became undeniable. Jim Thompson was our first major client conversion, followed by Francabelli. Ella Black switched after Kyle failed to resolve a critical delivery issue that I handled for Sterling within 24 hours. The turning point came at the Southwest Industrial Supply Conference in Dallas. Verena was there representing Hartwell at their premium booth location. I was there representing Sterling, meeting with clients who had specifically requested our presence. "Elio," she called out as I walked past her mostly empty booth, "could we talk privately?" "You're systematically destroying our client base," she said when we found a quiet corner. "I'm serving clients who chose to work with Sterling. That's called competition. This is a personal vendetta. You're using insider knowledge to steal our accounts."
Verena, I'm using 16 years of industry experience to build relationships with clients who value expertise over efficiency. You chose to eliminate that expertise from Hartwell. I chose to take it elsewhere. Her face went pale as the implications finally sank in. Every client meeting I was taking, every relationship I was rebuilding represented competitive advantage that she had voluntarily surrendered. The board is demanding explanations for our market share losses. What did you tell them? That we're experiencing temporary disruption due to competitive pressures. I looked at Verena and saw someone finally grasping the full scope of her strategic error. She hadn't just fired an expensive employee, she had armed her biggest competitor with detailed knowledge of Hartwell's vulnerabilities. "Verena, you told me that 2 college kids could replace me. How's that working out?" 18 months later, I stood in Sterling Enterprises' new regional headquarters in Houston, built with profits from market share we had captured from Hartwell Industries. The ribbon-cutting ceremony was attended by clients who had followed me from my previous employer and industry partners who recognized our expanded capabilities. Verena Campoli was not in attendance. She had been demoted to regional manager 6 months earlier when Hartwell lost 40% of its market share to Sterling Enterprises. Her case study on modernizing operations had become a cautionary tale about the strategic value of institutional knowledge. Business journals wrote extensively about Hartwell's collapse, focusing on how poor personnel decisions can create competitive disadvantages. Verena's name became synonymous with management short-sightedness, making her unemployable in any role requiring strategic thinking. Sometimes the most elegant revenge is simply succeeding so thoroughly that your critics must face the consequences of their own poor judgment. Verena fired me because she believed 2 college kids could replace 16 years of market expertise. Instead, her decision became the foundation for Sterling Enterprises' market dominance and a Harvard Business School case study on strategic management failures that will bear her name forever.
Have you ever been underestimated at work only to prove your critics wrong in the most spectacular way possible? Share your story in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this tale of professional revenge, smash that like button and subscribe to Hidden Hearth for more stories that prove sometimes the best revenge is simply being irreplaceable. Until next time, remember, experience isn't expensive, it's priceless.